Good evening and welcome to Scott++. It has been a busy week for me, but I wanted to make the time to do another session of working on the star voting app because the app is not going to build itself. Specifically tonight, I'm going to try to build out a new feature that lets a user, when they're creating an election, provide a public key that we'll use to then validate any users that vote in the election. Currently, we have things hard-coded to use our own public key. So if you want to validate a user, they need to sign in through our app. But someone else on the team is now working on a Discord bot that would facilitate users using star voting via Discord. So theoretically, that bot should be in charge of authenticating those users. So after I build out this system, the Discord bot could kind of set the key that it's going to use. And then when it's forwarding requests on behalf of the users, it can sign those requests with its own key, and we'll know that they're coming from that same bot. So if that's the kind of thing that sounds interesting to you, stay tuned. We'll hit it right after the intro and see how much I can get done tonight. Okay. So pretty straightforward. So far, I just added the auth key field to the election model, and we'll store that as a string. And then I updated the database for the election to add that field as well, both to the create election method as well as the update election method. So now what we need to do is actually use that field. So here in the method where we're grabbing the user from the request, we're verifying the token using our own app's private key. But what I need to do is, one, check if there is an election associated with this request. If so, does that election have a custom authentication key? And if so, use that key instead of our app's own private key. But before I do that, I'm actually going to dabble in some test-driven development. I'm going to write the test to see that it does fail. And then we'll go from there and make it passive. So, let's do it. All right, we've got a failing test. Just to walk through real quick, Googled up how to create a private and public key pair using RSA encryption. Pretty straightforward, just pulling in the crypto library there. Then I copy our default test election and set the new auth key field to use the public key that we've created. I then sign the user token with the new private key and then use that data to try to hit our create election endpoint. And that fails because we're only using our private key to try to authenticate, which obviously does not match. Now, when I first wrote this, it was passing because I forgot, and this is back in the last video, because so many of the previous tests were not set up with users with valid JWT tokens, I set the default for the mock account service to skip verifying those users. So to actually do the verification using the mock account service, I have to add this verify is true. But the nice thing about that is if I toggle this off, it does pass, which tells me that except for the invalid token, it is able to save the election with the new auth key field. So now that that test is written and failing, I can go ahead and work on making it pass. So we actually have two cases that we need to cover. One is when the user is creating an election, and in that case, the new token would be in the request itself, right? And so then we need to validate that user with the same token that they're passing in, which is a little weird, but it should work fine. We're actually fine if just anyone creates an election and you don't even need to add authentication to your election, right? You can create an election that anyone can just vote in. So all these features really only apply if you're specifically saying, I want to restrict voting users to those who authenticate with my token. So in this case, we're fine to self-verify for creating an election. So that's creating an election. And then after that, all subsequent requests about an election, whether it's to edit some fields for a user who has appropriate permissions for that election, or anyone else to vote in the election, they're usually only going to be passing in the election ID. So they won't have the token itself in the request. Rather, we need to look that up via the election and then validate the user. I believe currently we're actually doing the authentication before we look up the election they pass in. So we'll need to refactor that a little bit. So of those two, the first thing I'm going to tackle is creating the election itself, because that's really the test that I've written so far. And that's also the first thing that needs to happen in the user story. So let's get to it. Okay, a bit of a mess. All I did so far was I added this, so I'm still trying to verify with the private key, but then if that fails, only then I'm going to check if there is an input election, and if so, if it has a auth key, then try to verify with that auth key. Pretty simple. Thought it would be straightforward to pass the test, but not so. There are actually two issues. One is that when I was creating this token in the test, I was not passing in the algorithm for the JWT. So once I saw that the test wasn't passing, I thought better cover my bases, write a separate test just that I can verify this token even without it going through the system. So I wrote this little test that was failing, which led me to figure out I needed to pass in this extra algorithm option to the JWT when creating the token. So then I got this sanity test passing, but the main test was still failing. And I realized I made this update to the account service, but the test is, of course, using the mock account service. You don't want to write a test that is just testing the mock. So I'm actually in the account service. I'm going to add some utility functions to handle all this logic that both the core account service as well as the mock account service will utilize. So that way I'm actually testing the same code that will be running in production. So let me throw that together. Oh, it works. So pretty straightforward. I just created this static method inside account service utils. This has the exact same logic that I had put before. Inside the account service, I'm just calling that method. Then in the mock, similar to before, if we haven't set verified to true, just decode the token, don't worry about it. But if we have asked to verify, then I just call that exact same method. So now we've got a passing test. We've got some extra logic in the account service that is the same both for the production and mock version, and it is passing. Whew. Okay, I'd say we're about halfway done, and I'm pretty tired. But let us press on and see if we can't finish this up. Okay, so first step, wrote two failing tests. First, that the user cannot request a ballot with the app key, and then that they can request a ballot with the custom key. So obviously these are both failing, so now let's set that up. It seems we're at an impasse. What I've been trying to do is basically we now need access to the election inside the authentication middleware, right? So when we authenticate, we need to already have the election ID. Previously, what we had is inside the routes, this router.param with the ID would call the get election by ID middleware, which effectively would grab the election from the database and stick it into the request object. And I thought it would be simple enough to move that out into the app right before the app.use the auth controller. But unfortunately, it doesn't work like that, because while this is called, at this time Express has not parsed the params, and so those aren't actually available. So when this get election by ID is being run, the params are always empty, so it cannot get the election. So unfortunately, it looks like my strategy is not going to work out. I'm going to have to rethink this one. And since it's already midnight and I got to leave for a flight at 6 a.m., I'm going to have to call this. So I'll see you in the next shot, probably in another city. Let's go. Okay, I'm back. It's actually been quite a few days for me. It is pretty amazing how much better your brain works once you've had enough sleep. After my flight and catching up, it was pretty easy to find the solution to this problem. Previously, I had been trying to get this custom authentication working here where we have our get user middleware, right? So again, anytime a request comes in, it first hits all this middleware, and one of the first things that we do is authenticate the user. And I was trying to add that custom authentication here. However, there's no reason that we can't just do that here where we're handling the other election specific middleware. So previously there was this handler for when there is an election ID in the route parameters to go ahead and grab that election and store it in the request. And so we can just do any custom authentication for the election right after that. So here I added the new election specific authentication as an additional handler. That election specific authentication, if there is no election, it just yields to the next handler. Then similar, if there is not a custom authentication key for that election, again, just return next. But if there is, then we go ahead and run the custom election authentication, again, just using that election key. Then we replace any authenticated user in the request, which will be used further down the chain in additional logic. And so then again, the test that we have set up, we are testing that the user with using the standard app key for authentication cannot request a ballot for an election that has a custom auth key. And if the user is signed with that same custom auth key, then they can request their ballot. So that is feature complete. This has actually already been deployed to production. So now our team members on Star Voting who are working on the Discord bot can use that, and the Discord bot can handle authentication however it likes. It doesn't need to tap into the same Keycloak server that we're using for main authentication in the web browser. So thank you for going with me on this multi-night, multi-city adventure to code this up. I hope you got something out of this. As always, thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next video.